Yeah, just like that.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to slate this tape. The following interview is with Walter F. Staff. It was conducted on December 4th, 1986 at the Waikiki, the Sheraton Waikiki Hotel. It's about 9 o'clock at night. Mr. Staff lives in Salt Lake City, Utah. My name is Bart Fredo. I'm doing the interview, and also with me is Dan Martinez and Mark Tanaka-Sanders of the National Park Service. First of all, please tell me your name and your hometown.
My name is Walter F. Staff, Salt Lake City, Utah.
What service were you in?
I was in the U.S. Navy.
What was your job?
I was a carpenter's mate, second class at the time.
When did you come to Hawaii?
Oh, we used to come over on fleet maneuvers every spring, and in '41 we came over and just stayed. We were on more or less alert.
Let me take you back to the morning of December 7th. Where were you that morning?
I just came down from breakfast, and I was standing inside the carpenter shop.
Aboard your ship?
Aboard the U.S.S. Oklahoma.
Okay. And what were you doing?
Actually, I was repairing my movie chair. We'd go up to the movies, and the carpenters had made their own folding chairs, and I was putting new canvas on it.
When did you first sense that something was wrong?
I really didn't sense it at all. GQ went, General Quarters, and we'd just come in off maneuvers, and everybody was grousing, you know, Sunday morning, why are they bothering us?
You heard nothing prior to General Quarters?
No. And nobody moved, and the the boatswain mate over the PA system, he says, Jesus Christ, this is a Japanese air attack. No shit, get moving. And you could tell by his voice that something was going on. And I guess I had gone, I don't know just how far to my battle station, which was in the bow, and I was in the stern when we got the first hit. They were torpedo planes.
You're below deck?
I'm below deck. I'm on the third deck.
Right. And your battle station was where?
It was in the forward air compressor room to shut off the fresh water pumps.
And you tried to get there?
I got there.
You did?
I mean, you were trained. And the first explosion, I thought, what in the hell are they firing the turrets in harbor? Because the whole ship just rattled. I was on the starboard side, and of course we were hit on the port side, see? So I was clear across it.
Had you reached your battle station by the time this torpedo hit?
Oh no, we got 2 hits before I got down my station.
What effect did it have on you and on the ship, these hits?
Well, the ship kind of jumped out of the water, you know, and the whole thing shook. And like I said, I thought it was our turrets firing, because that was about the same effect that the turrets.
Can you give us some idea as to the magnitude of the shaking of the ship? Did it knock you off your feet, for example?
Oh yeah, it's just like picking it up 10 feet and dropping it back down.
So you were knocked down?
Yeah, you know, just to the deck.
What happened next?
Well, you were trained to go to your battle station, and I went. I made it down in the forward air compressor room, and then there was another little pump room, and I turned off it was a fresh water. So if you got a hit, you didn't have water, you know, leaking around.
What happened next?
I come back out of my hole, and there was 5 of us down in there. J.P. Centers, the machinist mate that took care of the forward air compressors. They used the compressed air to blow out the guns, you know. And by that time you could see it was listing. And we got another hit, and it knocked all the lights out. I mean, just shattered them.
So now you're below decks,
yeah, clear.
And it's pitch black.
On that last hit when it got black. And I was a senior petty officer, and one of the fellows had a cigarette lighter, and I said, it's time to get the hell out of here. And we started up the hatch, and about that time we were all 5 of us right together going up, and it was just like a waterfall hit us. And we didn't know at the time, but that's about the time the ship turned over.
You couldn't sense, could you sense that the ship was turning?
No, you were just going up this hatch, and just like in a waterfall. And there's only 2 of us come back out. The other 3 evidently were panicked and drowned when they, and of course you make for the top, you know, you expect to hit maybe an overhead or something, but we come out. And
how long were you in darkness after this water hit you? I assume that the cigarette lighter went out.
Oh yeah, that was just temporary, just a little bit of light we had.
So 3 men were swept away.
Yeah, they didn't come back, so we felled around, and then it was Sanders, the other petty officer. Pardon me, we didn't know where we were for, see, we thought we were 2 decks up. But we'd went up a deck, and then the ship turned over, and we'd went up another deck, so we're right back where we started.
So you were disoriented, so you retraced, in effect,
Yeah.
your path.
Well, we went up twice, but the ship went over in the meantime, so we're right back to where we were.
Did you know that at the time?
No, we didn't know at all. And
How long did it take before you realized?
You have no idea. In fact, when I got out, I thought it was still Sunday. You just lose all sense of time. And anyway, after we calmed down, which, how long, I don't know, hour maybe or whatever, I saw something shining on the bulkhead over there. Now, I made my way over there, and it was a phone on the bulkhead. The phone's upside down. It had a little luminous dial, you know, like your watch. And then we realized that we were upside down and where we were. And knowing where we were and underwater, we just were resigned to the fact we thought the air would go bad, and that would be that.
Describe the area you're in. Are you in a compartment? How big is it?
It was a fairly large compartment for a ship. As you know, the ships are all what you'd call rooms, and they're all watertight. Of course, there was fuel oil. The tanks had been ruptured. We're covered with fuel oil. And this water might have even been fresh water, because there was fresh water tanks in that area. See, we didn't think to taste it or anything, but there was fuel in it, this black.
Is this compartment you're in the size of an average room in a house?
Yes, this was one of the bigger compartments. They had 2 big air compressors in. And
how much water is in it?
it was about half full of water.
So the water is coming up to where on you?
Well, the ship wasn't actually upside down. It was on a little angle, so you had a kind of a corner where we could hover on that corner and be out of water, but of course you're all wet and cold and damp.
And it's still pitch black except for the illuminated dial on the phone.
And I mean black is black, you know, no light whatsoever down there.
Could you hear anything on the outside?
Yeah, we could hear the Maryland was inboard, and they'd had these new 1.1 guns, you know, pom, 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 pom. We could hear them firing, and that was evidently the second wave that came over. And we knew we were sunk, but we didn't know what was going on, really.
What did you do next?
You couldn't do anything. There was nothing to do. We didn't even think to tap.
You did not?
Mm-hmm. We knew where we were, and we just thought the air will go bad, we'll go to sleep, and that's it.
So were you both standing there? Were you sitting?
Well, kind of hovering and whatnot. We just...
What were you saying to each other?
We didn't really talk too much. You have a lot of thoughts, and like I say, you don't know, you have no idea of time.
Were you more withdrawn into yourself than...
Right, yeah. Of course, you prayed a lot. That's all there was to do. You can't go through a steel bulkhead.
Did you know this other man very well?
I knew him fairly well because we were both second-class petty officers. We went in about the same time. In fact, I have seen him. We had an Oklahoma convention in San Diego, and I met him for the first time since the end of the war. I forget what ship he went on.
So you both thought that you were going to die?
Oh, yes. We resigned to the fact. We figured the air would just go bad, and you'd just pass out.
You're with us, so what happened?
Well, like I say, you got no idea of time, but it must have been early Tuesday morning or late Monday night. We heard some tapping. So then it gave us new life. Then we didn't have anything to tap with. So we had to scrounge around, and I found a little open-end wrench and we tapped. Neither one of us knew the code because we weren't signalmen, and they were working their way to try to get us out.
Could you tap directly on the hull, or are you in a compartment?
Oh, we're in 2 or 3 compartments. See, the Battleship has a double bottom, and then they have voids, which they counterflood, and then they have storeroom, and then you have the heart of the ship.
So are you saying you were pounding on one of the hulls?
We're pounding on one of the bulkheads, and it echoes out throughout the...
After you heard this tapping, and then you started tapping, did you start getting answers to your tapping?
Oh yeah, you'd tap twice, you know, boom, boom, and then they'd answer boom, boom, because like I say, neither one of us knew the code.
So how long did that go on?
Who knows? Like I say, you just lose all idea of the time.
Can you give us a rough estimate? Was it an hour, 2 hours, less than an hour?
Well, looking back, it was a day or so later.
No, I meant from the time this tapping started.
Oh,
during this tapping phase.
It took them about an hour talking to them later to work their way down through the double bottoms. See, they couldn't just cut wildly in there. You had ammunition, you had fuel oil, and everything else. In fact, they cut into a compartment that was cork lined. They were using torches, and by the time they got it cut open, the two guys had suffocated that were in there. So they used an air hammer. It took them about an hour to cut a hole big enough for a man to get out through the plate.
So this tapping went on for about an hour, and then finally what happened?
Well, they drilled a hole first. They have these tapered plugs, so they can just plug the hole up, a test hole. And we were under quite a bit of water pressure. You know, you could hear the air going out. And that shot of light came down through, you know, just like a...
It was above you.
Yeah,
then.
right above us then. And I watched this water coming up, and I watched that hole.
The water was rising at this point?
Yeah, see, we were under quite a bit of air pressure.
Oh, so it was, in effect, sucking the water up.
Well, it was letting the water come up as the air pressure would go over.
Did it reach where you were standing?
Oh, yeah, reached clear up over our necks.
So there you are in water up to your neck, but you have this shaft of light coming down?
Yes, the water's running out. Like I say, the hull wasn't right flat. It was on an angle like that, and it was leaking out below, and we were in the high corner. And that the rescue team left because they were afraid of getting flooded, and that was the worst feeling because you're that close, and then...
Could you hear their voices?
Oh yeah, you couldn't really understand them because there was quite a hissing sound of the air going out. But they left, you know.
Because of fear for their
yeah.
own safety.
And unbeknown to us, they were going to come back on a little different route. And that's when we really felt the worst. Because, I mean, you're that close to getting out, and then you see them leave.
You thought all was lost. Your hopes were built
yeah.
up and then dashed.
In fact, this Sanders tried to drown himself, and I pulled him back up, and I says, we're not quite ready yet.
You mean when the rescue party left
yeah.
he tried to kill himself?
He was going to drown himself because you were to that point.
What did you say to him?
I grabbed him and pulled him up. I said, wait a minute, we're not through yet. And then you could hear them tapping again. They came back in on a little different direction.
And how long was it before they finally reached you?
Like I say, you had no idea of time. It's been so long, probably maybe an hour or whatever. I really couldn't say.
By this time it's Tuesday?
Yeah, this is Tuesday morning. And finally, when we came out, Sanders left. He hadn't had enough, and I sat there and talked to the rescue crew. One of the fellows was a first-class shipfitter, William Stanley Thomas, and he really organized the rescue mission. He was going by the Oklahoma Sunday afternoon. He heard some tapping.
But it wasn't your tapping.
Oh, no, it wasn't us. See, there was about 500 other people trapped in there at different compartments and stages of the game.
And they're working on a lot of them simultaneously?
No, nobody's working on anything. He goes over to the sub-base and gets some of our officers and says, I think we can get some of our men out. And, of course, if it hadn't been such a disaster, you know, they could have got a lot of people out, but they weren't. You know, they had other things to worry about, one ship with a few hundred men. And
when your rescuers finally broke through to you, describe that scene.
Well, it was a sickening scene when I came out and saw all the fleet on the bottom. The Arizona smoldering and all the battleships sitting on the bottom. We knew we were sunk. We had no idea that they'd sunk the whole fleet.
What was the conversation what was said between you and your rescuers, though?
I really don't remember. I know this Thomas, the ship fitter, he asked if we'd heard any more tapping because he was, in fact, they tried for, I think, another day and a half. There was still more tapping. They just couldn't locate him.
How can you best describe how you felt when they finally opened up and you knew you were safe?
Oh, just like being born again. It was really great because, like I say, we'd given up before we even tapped. You know, you're resigned to the fact, and then when there is more hope, why? But like I say, when we come out of that and saw the whole fleet on the bottom, that was terrible. We had no idea how much they announced Japanese air attacks. See, I didn't see an airplane or anything because I was below decks the whole thing.
What's the most vivid memory you have of that day, of that time trapped?
I think coming out and seeing all the battleships sunk, sitting on the bottom. They didn't call them sunk because the harbor wasn't deep enough. The top of them were out, but they were sitting on the bottom. The Arizona, like I say, was still smoldering.
As far as you know, were you the last?
I was the last out. I had the list of the different compartments and the time the men got out.
And Sanders left, got ahead, just ahead of you, so you were the last man off the Oklahoma.
Well, I sat there and tried to talk to Thomas because I knew him. We were pretty good friends. Carpenters and the ship fitters the shops were side by side. Big ship like that, you only really know about 25 people by name and everything.
What were the next few days like for you after you got out?
Well, they took us over to the Solus, a hospital ship. We were, well, you had broken ribs and abrasions and all this and that.
What injuries did you have?
I had broken ribs, and you're all cut up because it's just like taking this room and shaking it up and down, turning it over.
Were you in much pain during that time you were trapped?
You didn't know about pain. You were so terrified and hyped up you didn't.
How long did you stay in Hawaii before you left, after the attack?
I was only on the Solus, less than a day because there was people that were really injured, and then they put us over to the sub base. And of course, we stayed there about a week. We didn't have any clothes. And by that time, they were giving out shaving gear and towels and whatnot to some survivors, but see, by Tuesday, why, it was old hat. The other guys were getting it too, and we had nothing. Of course, we ate because we ate at the sub base.
By the way, you must have been rather hungry after being rescued.
Well, no, that was one of those things too. You were just so, I don't know what you want to call it, so shook up in that you weren't thirsty. You see, we didn't drink or eat or anything. I did lose 20 some odd pounds.
So when did you finally leave Hawaii?
And then I was assigned to the Medusa, which was a repair ship, and there was about 20 carpenters from some of the other battleships on there, and we didn't leave there till I think it was about the fall or the first of the next year when we were starting to get bases in the Pacific.
So you were here a while. Yes, yes. Is there anything, before I go on to another subject?
Speak.
Let's go back to the time when the ship is capsizing. Describe what was going on with you.
Well, as I say, the last thing we saw was on a pretty 15-degree list, I'd say, and we had no communications, and we knew something was going on, and gave him the old Navy saying, you know, let's get the hell out of here, we're not doing anything. And we went up this hatch, and we're all right together going up. 5
of you.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, it's just like you're a waterfall.
Is there panic at this point?
No, some of the fellows, one of the reasons we lost so many men below decks, we just took a bunch of new people aboard and didn't really have a station, so they sent everybody below decks, you know, an air attack. And I didn't know these were new fellows. They weren't rated. I didn't really know them. And they got when the lights went out, they got panicky because, I mean, you're in total darkness. And like I say, one had a cigarette lighter and he was flipping that.
When these new fellows started to panic, what did you do?
Well, you know, I said, let's get the heck out of here, and we started up, and with a cigarette lighter, that kind of calmed them down a little bit. And about that time, you're just like under a waterfall. You just hold your breath and come up, and Sanders and I came up, and the other 3 evidently were panicky and kept on breathing and drowned. We never ran into the bodies. We didn't look for them, but they were in there somewhere.
When the rescue party was trying to reach you, you're in this compartment, and the shaft of light broke through. Explain for us your position with respect to this shaft of light and where it's coming from.
It was fairly close above us. And like I say, they drill a hole first, and they have tapered wedges in case they run anything, and they just pound that wedge in.
When you say fairly close,
a few feet to the side and above us.
Okay, and then, again,
And like I say, the water started coming up. And to go back a little bit, there was a linen room on the side, and I told Sanders, I said, well, if we can get in this linen room, at least it'll be dry, you know. We were in water and fuel oil and everything. And they had, and so I beat the lock off the door. It was all locked up and we didn't have keys. It was a storage room.
what did you beat the lock off with?
I found this little open end wrench, and of course as you're beating on it, sparks would light up the little compartment. And I beat the lock off, and we couldn't push the door open, being as it was on an angle like that, and all this linen was wedged against the door. But we did break the water tight seal on it. So as this water come up, it had floated the linen, and we could push the door open. And that, like I say, I was looking at the hole, hoping that they could get it before the water came up, and the water was beating. You'd look back and forth, and it was coming up fairly fast. And so they left, and the water had got to the top of this door and then floated the linen so we could push it open. So we actually went in this linen room and then dogged the door down, so we were in a compartment that wasn't going to be flooded.
So you were relatively dry in there.
Yeah, well, the water had got in to push it up, but we were a little more comfortable in there.
Well, was it there or where you were that Sanders tried to drown himself?
That was before that we got in there, when the water come right up to our necks.
So when the rescue took place, it actually took place in the linen room.
Yeah, there was a manhole. They'd worked their way back around. They didn't have to cut in. And they yelled through if it was a dry compartment, and I knew what they meant. They were afraid of getting trapped or anything.
So you could understand what they were saying at this point?
You could yell through because there was no air leaking out making the sounds, or no torches or anything going. They were, so I says it's a dry compartment. I knew what he meant, and rather than try to explain that we had water but they wouldn't get flooded in and everything. So he said stand clear, because it was going to drop down from the overhead, which ordinary ship. And so they beat the dogs off, and the hatch come down, and there they are.
Someone stick his face in
and we came up, and you're still in the double bottom, so you're not out in the open yet.
shake hands. And
yeah, and of course, like I said, I knew this Thomas. And I sat there. He asked about if we'd heard any more tapping. He says, we got some more activity, and I can't quite locate him. But he said it was quite a task. He had been he had 16 years in the Navy, and he'd been the ship's plumber, and he knew the ship. So he had to turn over everything upside down and figure out before they made a move. Because like I say, you just couldn't go cutting in there. You could blow the whole thing up.
I'm going to move on to another subject. Okay, several other areas that they want us to cover in these interviews. Number one, how were you affected by martial law? Did that affect your life in any way?
Oh, I don't think so.
After the attack, there were restrictions on liberty and things like that. Did that influence your life?
Well, I guess the whole thing influenced my life.
No, I'm getting away from the attack now. I'm just talking about martial law now. Once things had more or less settled
when
down.
things quieted down, you went ashore, you had to take a gas mask, and the Navy built some bathhouses on Waikiki, and there wasn't a whole lot to do. You'd come in and your liberty was up, I think, at 6 o'clock or something like that.
Remember any of the places you used to go to, the names?
I used to come out here to Waikiki. I liked to swim, and this other ship I went on had 2 surfboards. We had a little locker, you'd go through the recreation department and check out the key, and never did learn to surf. They were big, huge boards at that time. They weren't these small, and you don't have much surf right here in Waikiki.
Did you get to know any civilians?
No, not really. I didn't have any contact or anything with civilians.
Yeah. So what happened, briefly, what happened to you in the rest of the war? What did you do?
I went all through the Pacific. I was overseas for the whole bit on the repair ship Medusa. We stayed the longest in the New Hebrides Islands. They had a big naval base there, And like I say, it was a repair ship.
Mm-hmm.
the best job we did, we got the presidential citation. We put a false bow on the Honolulu in 1 week, so it had the bow blown off, and they had to put a false bow. And they knew right where they were going to cut it, and we put this false bow on so they could go to Bremerton. By the time they got to Bremerton, they had the new bow ready, and they welded it on, and it was back out in another week. Everything was gung-ho then, you know. It was, you want to get back at them.
And the rest of the war?
All of it through the Pacific. I did get to Australia. We ran aground off New Guinea on this Medusa. And so we had to go and dry dock 1 week in Australia. But the rest of it was all Guadalcanal. We weren't in the battles, see, but we'd have the follow-up.
Went through the war without being wounded?
Yeah, that was my big action. That we had a couple of air raids that, and they were kind of silly. They didn't bother us because we were a repair ship, but see, it would have been to their advantage but they were after the fighting ships.
Some people who survived the attack on Pearl Harbor to this day still have some bad feelings about Japan, about the Japanese. How do you feel?
Well, they were like us. I did what I was told to do. We didn't know what we were doing, and I have a Japanese American. He's still got relatives in Japan, but he was born in Utah, and a very good friend of mine.
But I'm not talking about Japanese Americans. I'm talking about how do you feel about Japan and the Japanese?
Well, I don't have any animosity against them. They're an industrial people.
Have you mellowed over the years?
Oh yeah, sure. I have a Japanese car, which I wouldn't have had several years ago.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Why not? Because of the war, or because
yeah.
of economics?
Well, because of the war and whatnot, you know, it was...
What finally made you decide to buy a Japanese car?
You know, I hate to say, but it's a better made car than our American ones.
What is you lived through a very important event in history. You took part in it. How has that affected your life?
Well, I got trapped in the service, of course. You know, there was no discharges during the war, so I ended up with almost 8 years in, so I stayed with civil service with the government. I've worked for the Department of the Army, and I recently retired from the VA hospital. And all your government time, you know, my Navy time and everything went on. I retired with 37 years military or government service.
I guess what I'm asking you is, how do you think your life has changed, or you're different as a result of having been here on December 7th?
Well, I really don't know.
Let me put it another way. Do you think you're a different person as a result of the experience you had here?
Well, I don't think necessarily the Pearl Harbor experience, the Navy experience. They sent me to trade school, and I was a cabinet maker. You know, they taught me. In fact, I quit high school and went in the Navy. I didn't finish high school.
Very few people I know have been trapped in the hull of a ship for several days. How do you think that experience changed you, if at all?
I don't really think it changed me. I was awful nervous at first. Like on the Solus, the hospital ship, they had doors, you know, and you didn't get any rest there. A door would slam and you'd come up out of it for several months later. And when I went on the Medusa, I didn't want a below-deck station. I requested a topside gun station.
Did they understand?
Oh yeah, they gave me it. That doesn't. You finally get over that after a few years, I guess.
Japanese.
Oh,
Japanese.
yes. Another question that they wanted us to ask is, have you had any occasion over the course of the last 45 years, 40 years actually, to talk to Japanese veterans of the war? I mean Japanese. I don't mean Niseis.
Yeah. No, I really haven't.
What if you had the opportunity to, say, talk to a pilot who Japanese pilot who took part in the attack on Pearl Harbor and on the Oklahoma?
Well, I think I've mellowed and forgiven them. I mean, they were doing their thing just like we did ours. And there's been a lot of controversy about the bomb, and the bomb saved lives on both sides. It might have even saved mine. We didn't have to invade, and at that time they were fanatical people, you know. You had a...
Would you, if there were a Japanese survivor of the attack, would you like to talk to him, or would you just rather not?
I would just rather not. Like I said, I don't really have any feelings, but I don't...
Really nothing to say?
No, really not.